A very warm climate change welcome to you. Deliberately so, obviously, given the weather. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Chief Operating Officer and Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe, and have the pleasure and the privilege to moderate the session and this summit, which is all about integrated thinking. We've got to a point in our lives where I think politically, economically, in terms of economics and socially, we need to be having a much more of a, let's say, getting a grip moment and joining the dots moment, and actually thinking that we simply cannot continue to behave, think about policy and implementation in a siloed manner. Our lives aren't structured that way, and why should we be making policy in that way? And this is about, as we say, integrated Europe for a climate resilient Europe. What we have in store for you in this story, a good story has a beginning, a middle, and the end. And ours will be starting with the notion of industry and how we move industry forward in a clean, resilient, just manner. How do we make sure that we've got our ducks lined up and we don't leave people behind, but also we don't leave economies behind within Europe? How do we make sure we create balance, that the rich West, Germany and France, etc., don't leave behind Greece, Italy and others, Spain, for example, Portugal, in the lower ranks, and others? How do we make sure the East is able to really move forward in a just way, whilst not disrupting economies, if you like, especially where there's a reliance on fossil fuels, etc., and where people haven't started to even think about how to move forward in a more pragmatic, incremental way that ensures that both the economic engine is aligned to the social engine. And actually what we want to do is think of the two in one, if you like. You know the environment we're in, as you can see. I mean, our temperatures are the highest they'll ever be, I suppose, at the moment. I can't say they'll ever be, because we get every year a report saying that it's got even hotter. And, the IPCC's reports are going to become soon incredulous, because it's like, what's the point of saying it's too late? Because they've said it so often. And we've got this kind of convergence of a war, an economic crisis, an energy crisis, and we're likely to have a climate crisis in terms of the extremities of weather upon us, most likely this winter, in the next 4 months. As you can see, it's hideously warm in a way that we never imagined Brussels to be, but also other parts of the world. So how do we make sure that those who are, at the poorest end, and that's no one in this room, poorest end of society, are not actually broken apart, underserved, and underprivileged in the outcomes of a just transition that actually tackles climate change, but also creates equality and inclusion. And we make sure that we get an inclusive growth model to our future. To help us on this, in this discussion, we have a lovely panel first, where a group of speakers are going to start to think about these issues. I'm going to start with Timur. Timur, thank you very much for being with us. You do a number of things in the Energy Agency, and we're very pleased to have you here. What do you think we need to do? What parts of the clean supply chain do we need to be able to make sure we focus on in Europe? And what kind of competitive advantage does the EU hold?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thanks to the colleagues from Friends of Europe for the kind invitation. Really great to be here with you today. The way we try to think about the clean energy transition and clean energy technologies, in particular those that are mass manufactured, is that we are entering a new industrial age, which is an age of clean energy technology manufacturing. We released a report earlier this year, Energy Technology Perspectives, where we looked into supply chains in very much detail for all the different clean energy technologies out there. And when you look at just what happened over the last 2 decades, technologies that were in their infancy 20 years ago, like solar PV and wind, or if you look at electric vehicles and batteries, which were in their infancy 10 years ago, they have turned into vast manufacturing operations as of today, and there is much more to come. Certainly on the level of deployment, PV is breaking records every year. Electric cars, we just sold globally 3 years ago, 1 in 25 vehicles were electric. This year we're expecting 1 in 5 cars to be electric. So it's a huge, huge jump that we're seeing on the deployment side. And what we've analyzed is the manufacturing side here as well, where we are seeing very, very similar trends. Battery manufacturing, for example, we took stock as of Q1 this year. What are the announcements for battery manufacturing capacity for the long term? And it's actually sufficient to the announcements, if all of them come to, if all of them materialize, it would be sufficient to cater 60% of sales being electric by the year 2030. From 4% beginning of this decade to 60% by the end of this decade, aligned with our net zero by 2050 roadmap. Solar PV manufacturing is actually growing so strongly in terms of the announcements that it's well in excess of what our net zero pathway to 2050 would suggest is needed by the year 2030. So a big overhaul of industrial operations taking place. The new energy economy, in our view, is actually coming much faster than many people think, and with that age of clean technology manufacturing. Now, where's the problem? And this is also going into Europe now gradually. The problem is that not every country is well positioned to reap the benefits of that new energy economy. In fact, what we've analyzed is every single step of the supply chain for a range of clean energy technologies. And what you find is that these supply chains are heavily geographically concentrated. It's obvious when it comes to critical minerals mining, where you either have the resource or you don't have it. No? And so these resources are very much concentrated in a set of countries, and so they dominate global production right now. But when you look at every other step of the supply chain, critical mineral processing, production of key materials like steel, aluminum that we need to build our electric cars, our wind turbines, etc. And of course, the manufacturing of these key technologies, from PV to batteries to wind, etc. These are all heavily geographically concentrated, all very much in China. So China is far and away the largest producer of all of these steps in the clean energy technology supply chains. And when you look at the announcements that have been made, this is not going to change in the near future. To 2030, the sheer amount of announcements in China mean that China is far and away best placed to tap into the new energy economy that is emerging, despite even the Inflation Reduction Act that has been implemented. Europe, in many ways, has been a champion in the development of technologies and in the deployment of technologies. But the step in between, the manufacturing, that enables you to reap the industrial benefits, is where we need to make up grounds. Now, coming to your question is a bit long-winded approach probably to your question.
Helpful
what can
context.
Europe do in many ways? There are 3 things that I think are important here. And I know this is a very intense debate here in Brussels. Industrial policy, what does it actually mean for us here in Europe? The Net Zero Industry Act is a first step in this place. But there are 3 points I would like to make. One is, it's important for Europe to build on its own strength. It's not that Europe doesn't have strength. It has quite a few. There are some that are obvious. The large internal market with all the issues around it, of course, but it's a key asset. The skilled workforce that we have in Europe, this is a key asset that we can benefit from. The leading universities that we have, at least I hope they are leading. I mean, I studied in Europe in 3 different countries, so hopefully. But I mean, this is just a side point. But definitely, in terms of these kind of soft assets around it, outside the manufacturing itself, there are key advantages. Europe is still a key player in the production of a couple of clean energy technologies, even today. Wind power is one. Despite all the difficulties that the sector is facing in the supply chain context, EV manufacturing is a key player. Heat pumps, Europe is a key player. Electrolyzers is a key player. So Europe has some good basis to work from, and it can foster synergies with different industries. Europe has a very strong industrial base, from the chemical industry to the automotive industry to steel production, etc. Europe has a lot of world-famous brands with access to large global export markets. So this is something to work from, foster synergies between new industries and the existing industries. The second step is building strategic partnerships. So first, building on its own strength, but second, building strategic partnerships. I think it's important to recognize that it's not realistic for Europe, as it is for any other country, to compete in each and every single step of the supply chain, let alone in every supply chain. So building here on strategic partnerships with countries around the world that can complement the strength that Europe has for itself is an important opportunity. And the last point I would like to make is to push the innovation frontier. I think this is not something that is singular to one technology or something, but it's an important aspect of each and every step of the supply chain. Again, if you cannot build the technology cheaper than others, then try to build it better. Make it more durable, make it more efficient, make it less dependent on critical minerals, for example. There are many different things that you can do on the innovation frontier to improve these technologies. And I would like, and this is the last point in the innovation space that I would like to make, is in terms of material production, Europe is cutting edge on the innovation frontier. Steel production in particular, far and away the largest pipeline of projects to produce steel that is near zero emission compatible is actually in Europe. So building on these kind of strengths in the context of the various different industries that Europe has is one of the key aspects that I would like to make. Thank you.
Timur, thank you. I have to say, it doesn't fill me with great confidence and hope, though. I mean, a lot of the stuff is really soft and sort of, namby-pamby to a certain extent. You've got soft power. And this is not a criticism of you. It's about a self-reflection of Europe, because it kind of gives a sense of, you don't give up. Keep your resolve. It'll all be okay on the night. But actually, the assessment is really, 3 out of 10 if you were to have a scorecard. And what you're saying is that, I mean, clearly there are some industries, but steel, when you think about steel, who owns that production company mostly, if you think about where the supply chain goes out of Europe. And you're quite right. It's quite interesting that what you say about China is a really important point, because even in Germany, I've heard and I've seen that the solar panels are made in China and they're put into a German wrapper to say these are German made, and they're actually not. So there's something about what you're saying that I suppose there's something that's always been the case here is our deficit of having a manufacturing model and a scalable model between R&D, good stuff on tech or cutting edge technologies, but then taking it to a larger market, which it's almost like we're on a virtuous loop. We say this every year. It's been saying this for decades. And I suppose one of the things that would be good to, and I'll see what the audience have to say about this, is that, how do we get a grip? And I keep on using that word, is that time's running out. Time is short. We know that. And adversity is fine to inspire, the catalytic change, but we don't have to always have that, I suppose. And I suppose the thing is that I'm now going to move on to the banker side, if you like. We've got the potential opportunities. Constance, it's great to have you here, a banker, investment bank. You've committed to put about 50% of your portfolio towards this agenda, in terms of climate action and sustainability and environment. When you hear what Timur said, what's your view? How are you kind of planning to upscale or increase innovation in the marketplace?
Yeah, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today. When you talk about climate, then I would immediately add that at the EIB, we're not only looking at climate, but also at environmental sustainability, so biodiversity, nature-based solutions. Sometimes, that part of environment and nature doesn't always get the attention that it needs, in my view. And yes, indeed, we took some big decisions several years ago with our board to dedicate at least 50% of our financing to climate and environment. And we're actually already, it was supposed to be by 2025 to allow us to ramp up the portfolio of projects, but we're pretty good at execution. Actually, last year we already delivered 58%, some 36.5 billion of financing for climate and environment. Not to say that meeting those targets year after year and further growing is not a mean thing to do. And I have to say that with that ambitious target, we also found that it was necessary to further up our game on advisory, because we couldn't always find, the bankable projects in the market. So with our climate bank roadmap, we also agreed some frameworks, particularly for our corporate clients, because we also wanted to make sure that we were not just financing the green projects of a corporate high-emitting climate while they were doing nothing else, with the rest of their portfolio. So we were asking for their decarbonization plans. And when they didn't have one, and some of the mid-caps, for example, were found in this situation, then we were, we are working with them in order to get that further in the company. SMEs, I think, is another one which is very important to really, get them on track on this agenda. So we have been working through the EU Invest program to set up a green gateway. We like gateways these days. So we have a green checker. We're working, with our financial intermediaries to translate, EU taxonomy. What are the green activities in normal business language, to make sure that more of our money, is going into that. But we do see challenges. If we look to innovation. We think that 50% of the technologies that we need to get to net zero are not yet fully commercialized. We have other important new technologies. Wind was mentioned, offshore wind. We're financing floating offshore wind, but also hydrogen. We are, in our view, we're still really at an early stage of market integration and ramp up. We still have a huge job to do on the distribution, so the electricity, the grids, the network infrastructure, and also storage. And we need new technology solutions for that. So we're also very much focused on making sure that we can support, those, new breakthrough technologies, and we've been working, on different tools. In short, we think that we really, need to speed up the access to long-term, so patient capital and risk-bearing capital. And that's why, we always have to look to, how we can combine different sources. We're a bank, after all. Our loans need to be repaid. We can take, certain risk. But it often works very well, if you can combine, EU budget with EIB finance, and set up these de-risking instruments. The single market was mentioned. I think we still have some work to do.
Indeed.
Whenever we have a circular economy project, I can tell you, because we're also looking to barriers to investment, we have no scale. And if we have no scale, there is no sizable business that we can develop. So more work to do on that. Not to mention the challenge that we have in the EU, that the financing is very much bank lending financing. We have venture, we have the European Investment Fund, but if you look to the scale, for example, in the US, I don't think I need to repeat that in this room, but we really need to develop that capital markets union. And we should not be forgetting digitalization. It is really an enabler, and also in that area, there's really a lot more to do.
Constance, thank you very much. I suppose the issue there is very much about the speed with which the money can go to the right place and then actually have impact. And that's, I suppose, you're caught in that end, that almost at the upstream level, aren't you? Because of the decisions you've made. It's not going to get to market potentially in time for 2030. Is that a fair assessment?
We're working on it, but I think we always have to review, whether we've got the right, tools in the toolbox. And to that extent, I think the U.S. IRA was a nice wake-up call.
Yeah.
So I think it really pushed us to think through and to continue to work on making sure that we're taking all the right steps, and that's not a subsidy race in order to get to the net zero technology. And I think the fact that we are indeed focusing on manufacturing capacity is a long overlooked issue. So I think it's really good that this is on the agenda. But there are other parts as well that we need to work a little bit harder on, like energy efficiency. I really think that there are, more gains to be made.
Excellent, thank you. If any of you have a burgeoning question or an issue that's raised in your belly or gut or mind or whatever as a result of what you've heard, feel free to raise your hand. Great. Can I have a microphone here, please? I've caught off everyone by guard, obviously. Gentleman there, yes, that's right. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, and if it's a question directed to a particular panelist or general one, based on what you've heard so far?
Larry Moffat with the Brussels Press Club. I guess it's a question for Mr. Gül and maybe also for Ms. Kann. I attended a conference, a PV industry conference some weeks ago, and there was a representative there from one of the main Chinese manufacturers, and she said that they were planning, thanks to the IRA, they're planning to open manufacturing plants in the US, but she said, quote, there is no business case at the moment to do so in Europe. On the other hand, Ms. Kann, you mentioned hydrogen, and I see that Europe is investing billions in hydrogen. Not to be cynical, but it's certainly quite convenient for the natural gas industry that they can hope to use their infrastructure for that. So are we not putting our eggs in the wrong basket in terms of putting so much into the unproven hydrogen technology and not enough in solar?
And do you feel that that the hydrogen solution is kind of a one that the lobbyists have won? Is that what you're saying? So I'm just really clear. Let's just kind of cut to the chase.
I suspect so.
Okay. All right. Gentleman just behind you, thank you. Again, introduce yourself.
Yes, Bruno Tobak, Member of Parliament in Belgium. Actually, to build on that, I think it was Timur who spoke of the strong industrial base that we have in Europe and which is an advantage. But isn't it also a bit of a burden? Because part of the explanation, that's why hydrogen is so interesting, part of the interest in hydrogen is that we have a strong industry that can, with small adaptations, use hydrogen. The only problem is that we don't really have the capacity for green hydrogen production in Europe at a scale big enough to fill everyone's needs. Car industry is a bit of the same problem. Yes, we have a strong car industry, but it has been passed a long time ago when it comes to electric car production by car industries elsewhere in the world. So I have a strong impression that a lot of our industrial base is more of a burden in stranded assets than an asset for the long term. And how do we direct the investment and the money that we need and that we are short of compared to the IRA? How do we direct it to a future-proofed industry instead of keeping the dinosaurs alive?
Or I suppose, how do you repair and reuse existing assets, if you call them stranded, into something that's kind of usable? And when you think about hydrogen, what are we going to do with all those petrol stations all over all over Europe? How do you kind of do the transformation? I'm not sure anyone's thinking about that, actually.
And how do you avoid becoming dependent of countries elsewhere in the world that can produce hydrogen for us and transport it to Europe at great cost and great inefficiencies, up to the point when someone will realize that when you can produce hydrogen in Africa or in South America, why wouldn't you also produce the steel that you can produce based on hydrogen in South America or in Africa?
Great, that was a good start. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, that was kind of spice things up. So, Timur, first to you.
Okay, yeah, it's a whole array of questions.
I know, it's good, right?
I'm not sure, do we have the entire day for these two questions, or is it fewer? Now, when it comes to photovoltaic, I think there is no question that this is a key technology for decarbonizing power and for anything that will enable electrification in any kind of country. It's far and away, it's now the cheapest source of electricity generation and far and away the most amount of countries, including in many countries in Europe. It's scalable. It has all the assets that you need from a mass manufactured technology that help further bring down the cost. I actually spoke with Chinese manufacturers as well, and they're expecting another 50% cost drop until 2026 relative to 2020. There is no question that this is important technology, and key technology for anything, but the reality is too that the vast amount of manufacturing operations is currently taking place in China. And I think this is just a fact. It's not that anyone, or I'm not trying to say that this is a good or bad, it's just a fact. And the cheapest modules are being produced in China. Far and away, the largest amount of manufacturing operations is in China. So this is something that Europe will need to deal with. And I think the Net Zero Industry Act is a step in this, taking steps in this direction. I would not play out hydrogen versus solar PV. Hydrogen is not a technology that is, or an energy vector that is meant to do the same thing as photovoltaic. It is to be consumed in appropriate portions, I would say. It has an important place in the decarbonization of specific industries. We are today producing and consuming 96 million tons of hydrogen. The amount of CO2 that is coming from that hydrogen, which is entirely fossil-based, is equivalent to the annual emissions of UK and Indonesia combined. So it's a huge thing. We have to decarbonize that. There's no way around it. So I would not play out these type of technologies in this, are we betting on the wrong horse or one way or another? We will need them. No, I mean, there's no way around it, in my view. Just in terms of hydrogen, with all the technical aspects that were also mentioned by the second speaker here, it needs to find its appropriate place in the energy system. Long-distance transport is a possibility in its derivatives, potentially. Heavy industries are key applications. So here, these are important aspects to consider, and electrolyzers certainly have a similar advantage in many ways like PV. It's modular. It can be mass manufactured, so cost can come down here as well. The second question is more about the industrial base here, and what I'm thinking of here is not necessarily the problem of incumbents that you're talking about, but it's more the skills that we have in these industries, in the chemical industry, in the car industry, etc. I recognize, of course, all the difficulties that you touched upon. I think there's no question about this. The industries will need the appropriate policy signals in order to make these transformations, and there will be a couple of tough questions to be asked, in terms of what is being produced where, what is being imported from where. So these kind of questions are actually being discussed in many countries, I would say. But I think we need to think of our industries that we have in Europe also as an asset, to build that transformation in a forward-leaning way, because keeping an industrial structure in Europe is certainly an important policy preoccupation here in Europe as well.
Great, thank you. Constance?
Yeah, to a certain extent, the question reminds me of the board discussions we had back in 2010. When we were financing basically the wind parks, and every time, when such a project came to the board, there was this debate whether this wind energy would ever be cost competitive, whether it could live, without subsidies. And look, where we are now to today. So I would also agree, that we need a stable source. And I do think that there are areas in the EU where it makes a lot of sense. We're investing in Spain, for example, where we have renewable energy sources and the potential, for hydrogen. So we really think it is important, to further develop this technology. We also do a lot of work with cities and regions. And we know that there is a huge potential for rooftop solar in the cities. We just have to, again, further think through, how we can, get to the financial products that make it easier to really, finance these at scale. So you come at green mortgages. You come at bringing these green mortgages together and securitizing them so that we can do that at larger scale. So again, there is work to do. I think we have to be innovative, also on the kind of financing products that we need.
Thank you.
That there is a huge transformation challenge for our industry. I totally agree on that. We've been a bit late.
Absolutely. But it's not all down to you either. I mean, there's politics in the way as well. I mean, the council and the commission could have acted much faster by using its foresight and thinking very differently about the transition. It's what you're saying, absolutely right, that 10, 15 years ago, in terms of solar or even wind, it was a sense of, nah, it's never going to happen. It's never going to be competitive. And it's like, not being able to see the wood for the trees, as they say in the UK. However, I'm going to move to two of our European young leaders, one from the alumni of our young leaders, and then one from our current class. But André, two bits of legislation have come out, Net Zero Industry Act, and you've got the Critical Raw Materials Act. It's like, great, legislating for something that actually you have no potential to deliver. Potentially, that's me saying this, obviously. Do we have the technological readiness to move in the right direction? But I suppose you can move in the right direction, but can you do it in a timely way? So over to you, André.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Let me give you 4 numbers. I'm 99%, 72%, 26 out of 31, and 97%. So let me unpack that. 99%, that is what Timur just mentioned, is the share of China in the solar panel production. I mean, some people say 90, some people say 99.9, but that's basic. And here, the point here, it's about scale. These industries are completely industries which are only driven by scale. That means investors will only go in if there is a continental upside. And one of the things I would like to unpack on this topic on readiness is you can have the technology, and most of the solar technologies were, by the way, invented in companies like Q-Cells and the Fraunhofers in your country, so part my country, but they were scaled somewhere else. And the money is there in Europe, it's there in China, but just that the continental upside that you have there is second to none. 72%, that's the past, the solar part. 72%, that's what's happening right now. That's the share of batteries produced by China globally. And despite all the gigafactory projects, the Northvolt, Verkor, and all that we have in ACC in Europe, this rate is increasing. And that, here the point is not about scale, it's also about innovation. Right now, somebody talked about stranded assets. Right now, we are massively investing in Europe in lithium-ion batteries. I mean, it has become a household name. Well, CATL, maybe that was no, you talked about solar. CATL, which is the biggest producer in China of batteries, they begin to bet very big on sodium batteries, on what we call solid state, on air, lithium air batteries, etc. So they're already thinking about the next big thing. And the innovation part, it seems that we have on one side scale, on the other side innovation. Third, 26 out of 31. That is a more interesting one. These are the number, 31 are the number of startups in the fusion domain. Okay, fusion, some might say, like Stefan Zweig used to say about Brazil, it's the country of the future, and the joke was it will always remain like that. Fusion was always 30 years ahead. Well, this might not be the case anymore. There were 2 major breakthroughs in the last 12 months, one at MIT and one at the Lawrence Livermore lab in California, which may make this, sun in the bottle, that's basically what fusion is, a reality. And 26 startups in this area out of 31 are in the US. Isn't that an irony? Who is the continent and the country that really has an energy problem? It's not the US. it's definitely Europe. Why? And out of the 5, 1 is Japanese, 2 are German, Marvel and Focused, you probably know them, Timur, and the 2 are British. There's a half startup in France, but it's not really there yet. And this is the point about foresight. Okay. I mean, are we betting on today, or are we trying at least to experiment? And 97% is the share, is when you do a windmill, especially an offshore windmill, you want to reduce the maintenance cost. And so you try to do windmills without gearboxes, adapting to different wind speeds. And in order today to do windmills without gearboxes, you need what we call permanent magnets. And 97% of these permanent magnets are rare earth, are refined. It's much more than the extraction, it's the refining of rare earth. And this is also very different. People always say, oh yeah, China has the resources. It does not have all the mines, but it has very cleverly, in the last 15 years, focused the refining, these dirty processes of refining metals, and so we become totally dependent. And so this is the assessment today on the readiness level. On the 1 minute I have left, let me try to get some way forward out of that. Number 1, where is the boldness? Where is the boldness? To be honest, when I look at the European plans, I have a difficulty to see a clear objective. Remember Kennedy? We want to put a man on the moon and get it back before the end of the decade. There was a sense of the urgency, there was a very clear goal, and along this goal, you had thousands of projects. Where's the climate moonshot? I mean, the opportunity is there. It's also probably an opportunity to get our young people, our whole society around. It's not with percentages that we're going to excite people. No. So where's the OpenAI, basically, of climate? And just one little focus on OpenAI. I think we should see that as a wonderful sign that if you invent the next big thing, be it fusion, be it the future battery technology, you can actually reshuffle the cards much faster. Secondly, razor-sharp priorities. CRM, critical raw materials, we talked about that. Hydrogen, somebody talked about hydrogen. It's a total gain. We are among us, right? Linde and Air Liquide won the game, but 96% of hydrogen produced today in Europe is gray. It does not help at all the climate transition because green hydrogen is today 3 or 4 times more expensive, I speak under your control, than gray hydrogen. So where is the moonshot on getting the cost divided by 3? That would be a rate. I remind, and I'm a big fan of Horizon programs, but when Horizon is financing over 7 years, 38,000 projects. I don't think everybody's aware of the spray and pray we are doing. More you spray, the less priorities you have, and the less you can evaluate. So it's a vicious circle. Third and last point, we need to think differently in our industrial policy, and I think climate and technology is a very good. IPCAIs, do you really think by putting 2 billion upfront to BASF, Total, Umicore, and Varta, and say, may abate the battery, yes, they will do good jobs. Probably better would have been to say, we give you a bit of money, and if you invent a battery with an energy density 5 times better than today, then you get 3 or 4 billion. These kind of big bets, I think we've lost a little bit. So I think IPCAIs should, which is seen as a bit the mantra, should be revised. There's one economist who is hunting a little bit Brussels here, and it's very popular. And I think we have to be very careful. Professor Mazzucato, she's talked about the entrepreneurial state. People love her at the Berlaymont. Why? Because suddenly a lot of policymakers think that they can do it. I think we have to be very careful. It's not about the entrepreneurial state. The entrepreneurs, they're here. We should leave the entrepreneurs. It should be the strategic state who gives a vision along which. And when you look at the IRA, it's not the White House who is deciding what kind of project is going to happen. Even in China, and I'm fighting against the fact that this system has an advantage over us, even in China, it's not Zhong Nanhai or Mr. Xi who is deciding which project. He gives a plan. We have to be very, very careful about micromanaging. And being half French, I know what I'm talking about. I think this is industrial policy of the 20th century, and it's really doomed to fail. Last point, maybe on the technology part, is the foresight part. I mean, we had this discussion yesterday at dinner with Dharmendra. I remember the 3 goals of Ms. van der Leyen was green, digital, green, geopolitical, and foresight. Where has the foresight left? I mean, we have this capacity of looking ahead what the future technologies be it future batteries, future solar, future wind, future energy, nuclear energy, fusion. Even the Germans today, I mean, not everybody in the coalition, but even the FDP is pushing very much. So nuclear is not totally a no-no in Germany. Fission, probably. Fusion is probably a way where we can get positively out. So these are a few points, maybe, in how Europe can be not just you know, a soft power, but I think we need boldness and being much harder in our strategic thinking. Thank you.
André, thank you. Thank you for that passion, but also forensic insight, as always. I don't want to come back to you now, but I challenge you on what do you think the climate moonshot should be? And is that something that we, you know, as a think tank, working with you and some of you to say, actually, for the next mandate, perhaps it might be too late, but what should that be? What should that be? So if you have any thoughts on that, please also do contribute. Last but not least, Henrietta. A European young leader as well from this class, this year's class.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us. Great to be here. I guess my job here is to represent doing stuff on the ground. We're a technology and a project developer. We put real steel in the ground. We are, you know, we are green industry, really. But in any case, maybe a few comments on the green industry and everything. One thing that it doesn't mention, in fact, which is ultimately necessary for net zero, is carbon removal. And now the IPCC has mentioned that, unfortunately, every single scenario to get to net zero requires carbon to be also removed. So the Net Zero Act does mention carbon capture and storage, but that's different, actually. That's kind of emission reduction, because you're taking new emissions and storing it somewhere. Carbon removal, in fact, is removing some of the deficit or the debt that we have in the atmosphere and putting that into long-term storage, let's say over 100 years. Great if we can talk about thousands, but in any case, for this crisis, hundreds is enough. And now we have a gigantic challenge, of course, to green all of our industry and decarbonize all of the economy. But at the same time, we need to be ramping up carbon removal, because at the end of the day, 2030, 2035, we're still going to have residual emissions from some of these hard-to-abate sectors, and that emission amount needs to be removed. Now, today, the total carbon removal capacity globally is something around 1 million ton. And that's 1 million tons of CO2. To put this into perspective, what type of a challenge are we looking at? By 2030, the IPCC has said we need to be at 2 billion tons. And that's steel in the ground, that's new projects, that's building infrastructure. Building infrastructure takes over 24 months when you're looking at a real project with real engineers, procurement times, etc. So we're definitely in a rush. And so, a note on what Carbo Culture, my company, is doing. We do biochar carbon removal. So essentially, we harness the power of nature to draw down carbon into plant matter, and we convert it with a novel technology that we've developed into a stable form of carbon called biocarbons. And it's kind of like a charcoal-looking thing. It's inert carbons that stay stable for hundreds to thousands of years, and those carbons are stored safely in soil, where they can also limit other greenhouse gas emissions from soils. But in any case, it's a safe, proven way to do it today, and it's also energy positive. And now that's super, super important when we think about how do we scale up an entire industry that's going from 0 to gigatons, billions of tons of CO2 removal. We need to do it in a safe and energy affordable way. And so we're trying to help the grid go greener while doing carbon removal. And perhaps in the context of today, we are building a 3,000 ton per year unit in Helsinki. As we speak, it's deployed and starting. We have an opening ceremony in 6 weeks, which is very exciting for infrastructure, as things tend to take a while. And that was an EIC funded program, or EIC funded grant, so we're definitely feeling the support of the EU. We're in the EIB assistance program, where we're being helped to reach maturity in our project level thinking by real infrastructure experts, which is definitely needed for bankability of these projects, not just to attain EU funding, but actual bank financing from the private sector as well. So lots of stuff to do, but perhaps a few things to just note that we welcome the Net Zero Act and the CRCF because it brings a lot of assurance to investors that, okay, removals are now being thought of in a really truthful and long-term way as well from the EU. But obviously we don't want to see any winners being picked because there's so many technologies still being developed there. And for us, we feel that we represent exactly the strategic net zero technology because we're high in technology readiness level. We're contributing to the net zero goals that we have and ultimately also energy positive. So really, I feel that there are a lot of our type of companies in Europe, and now we need to get them off the ground. And of course, there are challenges, but hey, this is a crisis, so everybody needs to kind of act.
Henrietta, I mean, that was just too good to be true. It's like, you've had a lovely honeymoon. I mean, it's great. Them can't have been
You don't know how many times we almost died, honestly.
Okay, no, not that I want to have that kind of horror story, but, give the real deal here in terms of kind of how long, when you came up with a brilliant idea, right?
Yeah, too long.
Huh?
Too long is the answer, yeah. I mean, access to funding...
What were the issues, though? Was it about bankability? Or was it about men in grey suits who said, nah, A, you're a woman and you don't really know what you're talking about? Or is it because your technology was just not in the right space?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the above. So we got started 5 years ago before anybody knew what carbon removal is. Yeah. People were like, okay, this is probably important, but who's going to pay for it? And so... when we started, the ETS was at €5 a ton. Now it's 100, going to 150, I guess, in coming years. The industry is saying so that's definitely changed the game for us. The price on carbon is real today, not just in the voluntary market, and so that basically kind of like gave us a huge boost in the business model. But only 2 years ago, I'd say, is when people really started talking about carbon removal, as in like understanding what it is. Yeah. So if we're talking about solar that took a couple of decades to mature to something and have the supply chains, we don't have that luxury today. No. We actually have to do it all in a decade, maybe a decade and a half. So you see the dilemma when we're actually building real stuff. But now there's momentum and now there's speed. So finally we can do stuff. And
is there, and André, I know you want to come in, and I'm conscious of time. We've only got 5 minutes before the break. So if any of you want to ask a question, get ready and your hand up so that we can have the conversation with you too. Do you feel a peer group around you? And what I mean by that is, entrepreneurs like you who can see each other in themselves and say, we are actually something, in terms of a movement that can actually do something. Yeah, I'd say it's starting now. Like, I don't see enough peers because honestly, we need 1 million solutions to cater to the climate crisis. It's not going to be a silver bullet. There's not going to be one single technology. There's not going to even be one single carbon removal technology. We need a multitude of them. So definitely still need a lot more. But I mean, this was a complete insanity mission, years ago, without a proper market formed and with all the obstacles that you can possibly imagine. Female founders get about 1% of all the VC capital out there, or something ridiculous. So yes, it's kind of like been too quiet around there, but hopefully that'll change now. Let's hope. Let's see what we can do. I think we need some wins as well. Yeah. I think H2 Green Steel, I think some of these bigger, climate superstars are really helping show the younger generation and also the venture capitalists who are just used to making money on software that, there's a new economy, it requires a new approach. We have to have new types of thinking and new types of financing mechanisms as well, with multiple stakeholders, not just venture at the table. Yeah, and there's a sense that the green VC, I mean, there isn't such a thing as a green VC movement, but there should be. There's so many VCs, they're stacked in certain parts. I mean, I know in the UK it's quite a lot. Sorry? There's so many green VCs, but a lot of them just fund software, and software is not going to take us to the net zero that the green industry needs. André? Yeah, no, I want to remind everybody, remember what happened 2020 with Operation Warp Speed. I mean, we're in this exponential age where it's increasingly difficult to anticipate what's going on in a week.
So we probably need to put on the head our way to actually fund money. And I know that is very hard to hear for people who have been in banking and are used to due diligence. We probably need to go to probabilistic. That means we will not be able to pick the winner. So in order to avoid these people, like being on a Hunger Game for 5, 10 years until it makes, we probably should fund, like it was done with the vaccine, 10 different streams, probably put 5, 10, 20 million, and I would guess, and I would challenge some economists to actually look if at the total, doing that and cutting very quickly those who don't deliver, but those you gave the chance, is probably a better usage of money than trying to wait for the winner. And this is, by the way, happening in the research industry too. There are some big institutions, I don't want to name them, who begin to think we cannot just have evaluation because we are in this exponential age. Let's give a chance to every young researcher, give him for 5 years, and then be super hard on the evaluation. Today, we don't have the evaluation part, and we try to pick the winner. I think that, and this is totally different. And I think if banks like that begin to have a little bit more a VC approach, where you say, okay, we do 10, and let's see what comes out, that might give a chance to everybody.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll disagree slightly. So actually, ironically, I do think that helping the companies mature, especially in infrastructure, is critically needed for their financing. Sure. After that, first risk period. But at the same time, the early period does take too long. And there we have to have the mindset that we're not going to know what's going to work out perfectly when we're still in the early stages. So there's like a dual approach needed.
Okay. They're excited.
A few questions at the back.
2 questions, great. Again, please do say who you are or if your question is targeted at someone specific.
Hello, thank you. Emily Stewart from the Open Society Foundations. I wanted to come back on this point about the foresight and the big bets, and an area where I think that the EU is showing lack of foresight and making the wrong big bet, which is potentially on electric vehicles, which Timur was telling us has been massively expanded. So it appears to me that the EU is making its big bet on electric vehicles. Some of the companies are actually calling themselves renewable companies now. Given that we know that the amount of critical raw materials in the world is limited and that the foresight at the moment is that just meeting the Paris goals will expand the amount that's needed by 1,000% in the world, which we cannot meet at the moment, is the EU potentially missing the boat on investments in other types of renewables by making its big bets on traditional industries and just trying to support that? And to come back on the question about what the moonshot is, I think indeed it is carbon removal, but it's also potentially this idea of sufficiency and living well within our planetary boundaries, which I don't think we've heard discussed yet. Thank you.
But how do you turn that into an investment model, though?
Indeed, how do you? Because it's at its core, it's about degrowth, isn't it? It's about degrowing our industries, and you don't invest in that. And I think it's potentially not very popular because it doesn't have a lot of dynamic tag words that we can put with it, and that makes it problematic for, I think the way that we talk about these things is all very dynamic. How, growth is a dynamic word, and degrowth, it doesn't sound quite so sexy.
No, exactly.
Just
go on.
A very quick comment that actually, like, the reuse of materials is, even though we don't mention it, it is also at the core. We use, for example, waste materials that we actually upcycle, or there are battery recycling companies that have raised billions in the north of Sweden and so forth. So I think it's definitely the new gold is the recycled and upcycled materials and so forth, and definitely not an area to overlook.
Yeah, but today recycling a battery costs lithium-ion battery costs 3.5 times more than importing it from Chile. It depends, of course, on transport costs. So this is a moonshot. And the second thing I want, there are 140 people, PhDs, at the Office of Science and Technology at the White House. And currently, the big topic in the US is not anymore quantum or AI or green, it's synthetic biology. And the way maybe to recombine what you say with growth is we are today in an extracting economy. We extract the minerals, we extract the leather from the cows, the milk from the cows. We all know what is the consequence. Can we go milk without cows? Can we grow dysprosium from bacteria and synthetic biology? That would be a moonshot. That would suddenly recombine the fact that we are staying within the planetary boundaries. The word synthetic biology is absent in this city. This is really a challenge. We need more PhDs at the 13th floor.
Gentlemen yes, there you go. And then I'll come to you, I promise, and that's it.
Yes, Arnaldo Bruzzini, in RES private sector. I've been in the business for years trying to convince private sector, individual business to buy the sustainability objectives and the clean energy and whatever else is around. It seems to me that now we are, or we risk to preach to converted people in this room. And I want to play the devil's role for a while. Now, if you go on the ground and you meet individual entrepreneurs, now, what we listen here is that money is not going the right way. Elsewhere is going much faster. Development is happening elsewhere, not here in Europe. Manufacturing is happening elsewhere, not here in Europe. And the perspectives are very gloomy here in Europe in terms of achieving the goals that we are setting. Now, how do you convince the basic entrepreneurs in Europe to embrace the very ambitious goal that we want to reach here? The risk is that we try to convert them through regulations, and that it is not something enthusiastic, believe me. What is your solution for this?
Okay. No. These two young leaders, they're really taking charge. I'm the moderator here. I'm joking. I really am. It's lovely to have you be so proactive. I want to make sure I've only got limited time. I want to take the gentleman here, and then all of you can have a go. Sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm Henri Marin, chair of a citizen group in Belgium, fighting for a sustainable energy mix. And we as citizens, we don't think that decarbonization is possible without nuclear. And we don't see in the industry today in Europe that they are building new nuclear SMRs. You have spoken about fusion. Okay, there's still work to be done on fission. So that's a question for us.
And so you'd prefer to see nuclear as part of the mix?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though, so no, this is a judgmental question. It's not a response. You know that the timescale that's required to build new nuclear.
Yep, sure.
Okay, fine. All right. That wasn't a leading comment, but you know what I mean. Because, time has run out by the time you've got a plant in place, and the investment you require is significant. And I think the two things we don't have in our sort of purview is time and patience to actually tackle what's happening right in front of us. So, Constance, I'm going to start with you, and then so we can literally just a few comments from your side on what we've been hearing so far.
Yeah. No, what I just heard from you is that, or maybe I can translate it that way, that often business is seeing green as a cost. And I think it is important to ensure that green is seen as an opportunity. We do an investment survey. Every year we survey some 12,500 companies of different sizes in the EU, and we do see, okay, partly driven, for example, by the high energy prices, that energy efficiency is becoming, higher on the radar screen of companies. Just they see the opportunity of reduction of cost, but you also see the trickle-on, effects in the value chain. Where really more type of green products or green supply of parts of products are required. So we do see a change there, but we also do see that it is important to ensure that regulatory, that policy environment is clear, with clear targets, so that there is a kind of predictability as to what is going to be needed in the future. And so we see a change. When we talk to the business, and that's across Europe, also in Central and Eastern Europe. that green is seen really as a business opportunity.
Great, thanks. André, can I ask, I'm going to go to you because I know that you're going to challenge me most in terms of time, and I need to wrap up. So if I squeeze you in now...
Squeeze me,
yeah.
No problem. You know, the question of the gentleman, I think, is a critical one. What is basically the role of the state? I already mentioned the fact on the vision. I think we need a state who set up visions and also revisits them very often. I think the thing to say, we set a vision and it stays we stick to that for the next 10 years is totally unadapted to the world of today. And we need to think the regulation also in this way. Probably we need to have regulation. I made a little op-ed a couple of months ago called about pop-up regulation. Let's do them fast, not sandboxes, because sandboxes means that you put people in a small corner. Let's do regulation very fast, and after 6 months, let's make an assessment. We are very bad at doing assessments. We never actually do. Did we do an assessment on GDPR? Did we do an assessment on the Juncker plan? Not really. Secondly, we need to be able to focus. Not every priority is as important. There are points which will have totally transformational effect. I talked about synthetic biology. Your points, sir, I mean, France is a big nuclear country. Those who put in molten salt reactors last week or this week are the Chinese. I mean, what an irony. And I don't think, and that's my last point, it should always be slow. You're right, Dharmendra, it takes 10 or 15 years to do a nuclear plant, but let's also remind that to open up a plant of lithium plant in Europe, it takes between 8 and 10 years. We always think it's so easy. No, it takes a long time too. So let's do things in parallel. Let's experiment. And last but not least is the taxonomy. The taxonomy should not be something which is a very technical exercise. What is the vision for the citizen that we have? And then we deduct the tools. Too often we have the technical tools and then we try to make them relevant. I think we need this moonshot. I mean, that was the genius of Kennedy. A very simple goal where even the person cleaning the Kennedy Space Center, when you asked him, he said, I'm working to get a man or a woman on the moon. And then you had 10,000 of projects that were triggered for that. And we still benefit a lot from that.
Thank you very much. Timur, do you want to make a comment?
Very briefly, because it's a very intense debate, and I think when you're listening to the questions, actually, you can see very clearly what kind of constituencies everyone is operating with, in many ways. Who are the counterparts, etc. And I think these kind of discussions are very important because ultimately there is no one pathway here. And I think every country takes its own choices, every society takes its own choices, individuals make their own choices. The key point to my mind is the transition is all about three things to net zero emissions. Is about the energy security aspect, it's about the industrial opportunities, and it's about the climate challenge. And I think in all of this, what is the common denominator is time. There is very little time that is available. And when you just think about the climate challenge here, what we need to achieve in terms of bringing emissions down to 2030, net zero emissions by mid-century, it basically means you need to do two things at the same time: deploy whatever you have available in terms of clean energy technologies, and innovate on those that you don't have available as yet. And I think there's no way around it. We can disagree or agree on individual technologies. In fact, SMR reactors are not going to be available today or tomorrow immediately in the market, but they are under development in many countries. Many countries are pushing very hard for that. They can play a role in those countries that wish to pursue them. They will be much more modular than existing configurations. So there is opportunity in the innovation space, no doubts about that. But it doesn't mean that all of which this will need to be applied in Europe or in every single country here, but other countries may choose to do so. Thank you.
Oh, you're a bank, okay.
No, I just want to take up the point we don't assess. And you mentioned the Juncker plan, so I feel compelled to just say one sentence. We do, I think, assess. And I think it's the fact that we have InvestEU, as a follow-up to the Juncker plan, because it worked, we delivered. But also we adapt. Just last week, we added money into the InvestEU program to be able to mobilize some 10 billion for strategic technologies for Europe. So maybe we don't do it always fast enough, not big enough, but there is assessment of what works, and I think that's what you see in InvestEU. That's what you see in the top up of the innovation fund.
Yeah, we just need to kind of close the gap between when that between when the thinking or should have been happening and when we actually move to it, and the learning has to be much faster. Henrietta, do you want to just make a
super quick? The gentleman asked how to get the entrepreneurs up and running, and maybe that's the one I can comment on. I mean, of course, there's the making the playing field easier, faster permitting of first of a kind and so forth, all of that stuff. But really it's about setting examples. I mean, that's my own path to entrepreneurship, was just seeing other people do it and then wanting to do it myself. And I think that's what Europe needs is a couple of, good companies to show and inspire the kind of next generation of entrepreneurs. And this sort of a funnel thinking of from pre-seed to project finance all the way to IPO kind of needs to be trodden a few times, that it's a little bit more clear, because right now it's kind of stop here, start here, stop here, start here. So I think that kind of funnel thinking of how do we get the ones from the early stage all the way through and obviously keep the larger companies in Europe without them selling too early is critical.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for being patient with me. Your coffee is literally here around the corner, don't worry. Just to say thank you all for this stimulating and thoughtful conversation and discussion. One of the issues, and just 2 points, how do we make sure we bring more people like you to meet more people like you around Europe through investors? So whether it's a bank or whatever, how do you create a community that actually is able to be brought together that can do the scale thing? It's a bit about what you're saying, André, is that you can bet on 15 rather than just 2 or 3. But how do you bring some of the ones that are at seed stage, at the third, second stage, and then up to scale to actually bring together a community of entrepreneurs in Europe more effectively? And the final point I'll make is that not anyone has mentioned SMEs. They are the backbone of Europe. Okay. I mean, in terms of a subject. Yeah, okay. You two can kind of, yes, absolutely. I'm talking about as a topic for conversation, discussion. They are the backbone of Europe, and actually they are not in this debate, and they're not in the game of greening at this end. I'm talking about the vast majority of SMEs, which are at the small end, if you like, of the economy. However, on that point, have a chat about that. Disagree. I can see you're disagreeing with me. That's great. It's good. You'll have a You'll have a good conversation over coffee on that. Thank you all very much for staying here. Please don't go, because we're now going to move into a session at 11 o'clock about, is the Green Deal for everybody? How can we make sure it's for all Europeans? Thank you, our speakers, very much, and thank you.